Welcome to the Afghan caves of 1943, a place men swore they would never speak of again. A place where shadows move with wings brushing the stone walls before vanishing into darkness. Where Allied patrols encountered something impossible, something alive yet unseen, something that defied reason. A shape larger than any human, larger than any known beast, gliding silently through corridors, too narrow to contain it, yet leaving behind the echo of wings, the faint scent of ozone, and a terror that gripped the soldiers' hearts before their minds could comprehend it. A whisper of motion in the torchlight, a glimmer of eyes that should not exist, and then nothing. Yet the air feels wrong. The stone feels alive, and every step threatens to reveal more than any man could bear. March 1943, Afghanistan's highlands. Steep cliffs and jagged rocks wind howling through the caves like a chorus of lost souls. The patrols move carefully, rifles ready, boots crunching against uneven stone. Every shadow stretches longer than it should. Every echo carries more than sound, and the air vibrates with a presence unseen. The patrol's radios crackle and die in static that seems almost sentient. Torches illuminate glimpses of claws, glimpses of wings, glimpses of a creature that exists at the edge of understanding. The wind moans, carrying dust and whispers through narrow passages, and the soldiers feel the weight of eyes that are not human. Every step forward is a gamble, every torch flicker a revelation, every breath an invitation to something beyond comprehension. And still they press on, compelled by orders, by duty, by a pull they cannot name. Before we begin, leave a comment where you're watching from, and the exact time you're listening. Share the moment. Your skin prickled, your heart raced, the moment you felt the unseen brush past you. Share your fear, your awe, your disbelief. And imagine the patrol's rifles raised, moving through darkness, alive with impossible wings, shadows that shift against logic, eyes that gleam in the half-light, waiting, watching, challenging everything they know, everything they believe, everything that should be possible. Welcome to the Winged Secrets. Welcome to a story where reality shatters in the first heartbeat, where shadows fly, and where nothing will prepare you for what comes next. March 1943. The Afghan highlands lay under a pale winter sun, the wind slicing across jagged cliffs, carrying dust and loose stones into hidden chasms where the earth itself seemed to breathe. Every ridge and crevice held secrets older than memory, and every shadow promised danger unseen, yet deeply felt. The Allied patrol moved with precise caution, rifles slung, boots crunching on fractured rock, breath visible in the thin, cold air, hearts beating in rhythm with the rhythm of the mountains themselves. Maps marked the caves as minor formations, unimportant in the larger theater of war, yet the patrol had orders to scout, to survey, to record, to understand. But understanding in these highlands meant confronting the unknown, the impossible, and what men could not name. Torchlight flickered against walls slick with condensation, illuminating fissures and shelves that seemed carved by hands, beyond human comprehension. Surfaces too smooth, angles too deliberate, shadows that moved even without wind. The men whispered among themselves, voices low tension, tight, a collective awareness that each step forward could expose them to forces they could neither measure nor predict. Every sound, rocks shifting underfoot, wind moaning through narrow passages, distant echoes, was amplified, distorted and laden with uncertainty. Eyes darted following shapes that seemed to detach from the walls, wings brushing the stone forms, too fast, too deliberate to be natural, and yet tangible in their presence. Corporal Jensen, a man with 3 years in reconnaissance, paused, torch shaking in hand. Breath ragged as a figure flitted just beyond the edge of light wings spanning the corridor, a shadow brushing the ceiling, before disappearing into a fissure unseen. He whispered to Lieutenant Carrington, who froze mid-step, unable to fully comprehend what his eyes had witnessed. The journals would later record hesitation, a lag in movement, a tangible pause in the patrol's march that carried heavier weight than any rockslide, heavier than any known threat from local militia or wildlife. The soldiers moved in measured sequences, signals, subtle gestures, controlled eyes scanning every nerve taut, every sense heightened, aware that whatever they faced was not catalogued in any field manual, not addressed in training or doctrine. Each cavern split into a labyrinth of corridors, vertical shafts, hidden chambers, and the deeper they pressed, the more the atmosphere changed. Air became thick, almost viscous, carrying a faint metallic tang, carrying a low hum that seemed to vibrate in resonance with the soldier's own heartbeat, a frequency that unsettled the body, made joints ache, made vision sharpen, unnaturally. Senses skew toward the impossible. Footsteps echoed differently here, offset by some unseen rhythm, by some force outside human perception, and shadows moved against angles, against torchlight, against reason itself. The patrol recorded what they could, notes, sketches, diagrams, yet even as they documented, reality seemed to warp. A passage that had been empty moments before now held an impression of wings clawed broad, impossible in proportion, moving with intent, vanishing as quickly as they appeared, leaving the men questioning if they had witnessed anything at all. Lieutenant Carrington paused at a junction, listening. The wind carried sounds unlike any ordinary cave noises, a soft thrum like a beating of wings against stone, interspersed with whispers that were not wind whispers that seemed to form words in an unfamiliar tongue, incomprehensible yet urgent. He signaled for the patrol to halt. Corporal Jensen's hand trembled on his rifle, knuckles white as eyes flicked toward fissures and alcoves, anticipating movement that had already occurred and yet was not there. The men's senses sharpened beyond training. They relied on instincts forged in combat, yet instinct faltered here, unable to match phenomena that were neither alive nor inert, neither fully material nor spectral. A sudden shift in the air sent a spray of condensation from the cave wall, a mist that hung momentarily catching torchlight, forming shapes that resembled wings, talons, eyes glinting, and then dissipating, leaving a trace in the mind longer than in sight. Notes later recorded the visceral reaction, a mixture of fear, awe, and disbelief, emotions compounded, magnified by the isolation and the cavern's unnatural acoustics. Every step, every turn, every inhalation carried the weight of possibility, the weight of history, the weight of something ancient, something predatory, something that observed, measured, and waited. The patrol advanced cautiously, charting each corridor, noting every fissure, marking points, where shadows shifted independently of light, where echoes returned not as repetition, but as variation. As if the cave itself mimicked, responded, anticipated. One soldier swore he heard wings beating in unison with his own heartbeat, a rhythm that matched and diverged, teasing comprehension, challenging logic. Another claimed to feel a presence moving behind him in the periphery. Yet when he turned, nothing met his gaze except stone and darkness. The patrol's radios intended for contact with base emitted nothing but static that seemed to pulse, rise, fall, respond to motion, to thought, to attention. The men spoke in whispers, now acknowledging phenomena without naming it, creating shorthand, relying on gestures, on intuition, on shared experience that defied verbalization. Each torch flicker revealed traces, scratches in stone that suggested claws, larger than any known predator, smudges of a substance, unidentifiable, impressions in dust where nothing should have landed, yet a form had been and was no longer. As hours passed, the environment itself seemed to change. Temperatures fluctuated sharply, air thickened, shadows lengthened and shortened erratically, and the patrol became aware that they were no longer simply navigating the caves. They were being navigated, guided, measured by forces unseen. Moments of stillness, amplified sound, amplified perception, amplified fear. They documented anomalies, sketches, notes, measurements. But even as they did, the mind questioned, the senses rebelled, and memory began to fragment between observed reality and the impression of the impossible. A figure flitted through torchlight, broad wings spanning the passage, eyes reflecting firelight, and then vanished, leaving only the echo of movement and the sense that the cave itself exhaled alive with something beyond comprehension. By midday, exhaustion, cold, and tension began to fray nerves. Soldiers whispered of things glimpsed in the corner of vision, shadows, detaching from walls, wings, brushing stone forms, moving faster than perception, leaving impressions of impossible size and speed. Every attempt to communicate via gesture or radio was confounded. Every mark on the map seemed inadequate to describe the labyrinthine cave structure or the movements within. Corporal Jensen's journal noted, "We are no longer explorers. We are participants. The cave observes. The shadows respond. We are small, insignificant, but they know we are here." The patrol pressed forward, compelled by orders and duty, yet aware that each corridor could contain wings, eyes, talons, or nothing at all, and that nothing might be far more dangerous than presence. Every corner turned, every step, every inhalation reinforced the realization the caves were alive, in a manner beyond life, populated by creatures whose very existence defied explanation, whose observation could not be escaped, whose wings brushed against reality itself, leaving men changed, shaken, and haunted, long after the torchlight faded. The patrol emerged hours later into sunlight that felt both relief and alien, carrying sketches, notes, and impressions too profound to articulate fully. Wings, shadows, eyes, whispers, elements recorded, and yet forever beyond full comprehension. Every soldier carried the echo of presence, the memory of impossible movement, the impression that the caves and their winged occupants existed on a threshold, visible and invisible, real and impossible, waiting for the next intrusion, the next observer, the next moment when the impossible brushed against the living world. The official records of the Allied patrol were sparse, fragmented, and carefully classified, yet what survives in the archives hints at the extraordinary and the inexplicable. Reports noted the patrol's objectives to survey the cave systems, document geological features, and secure any strategic vantage points. But these banal aims were overwhelmed by events that defied conventional explanation. A series of sketches hastily drawn and annotated in margins depicted forms described as winged silhouettes of impossible proportions with clawed extremities and eyes that reflected torchlight, as if molten. One entry attributed to Corporal Jensen simply read, "Movement not accounted for by wind or sound. Impossible scale. Wings spanning corridors. Presence felt before seen. Singular disappearance feared." Even the language used in these notes betrays the officers' struggle to reconcile what they observed with reality. Singular disappearance, fate unknown, mysterious occurrence recur across reports as though repetition might anchor the mind against the chaos of perception. The patrol's logbooks provide further detail. Dates, times, and locations are meticulously recorded, but alongside these are annotations describing anomalies, torchlight, refracting against surfaces that did not exist. Moments prior, echoes returning in patterns contrary to physics and temperatures fluctuating without cause. One passage reads, "At 09:23 hours, a shape moved across the northern shaft wings, extended, no sound, produced no dust, disturbed, no trace remaining." All present observed, but no measurement could capture the scale. Reason faltered. Officers wrote in a formal tone, yet the anxiety is palpable, conveyed in repeated exclamation marks, underlined phrases, and marginal notations of unfathomable and beyond comprehension. Eyewitness accounts corroborate the written records. Private Rawl, in a personal diary later submitted to the military archive, recounts a moment when the patrol paused at a fork in the cave. "I swear it rose from nothing," he wrote. "A shadow larger than the tallest man, with wings spanning the width of the passage and eyes like fire reflecting our torchlight. It moved with purpose, no hesitation. We were frozen. It vanished before a second glance, leaving a void where the world felt altered, distorted, wrong." These accounts, later cross-referenced with Lieutenant Carrington's notes, reveal a pattern. Every encounter was brief, fleeting, yet seared into memory, with extraordinary clarity, as though the impossibility of the moment intensified perception, cemented fear, and resisted erasure. The patrol's sketches, some nearly illegible from hurried observation, illustrate forms that bend natural laws, wings that fold and extend in ways contradictory to aerodynamics. Shadows detaching from stone talons, leaving impressions that disappear before measurement, and forms so large the corridors should have been impassable. Measurements taken by the men were inconsistent, reflecting both human error under stress and the difficulty of recording phenomena that operate beyond known physics. The archives contain repeated annotations, cannot quantify dimensions, approximate material unknown. Yet these sparse notations hint at a singular truth: the men were in contact with entities whose existence challenged science and reason alike. Beyond visual evidence, auditory anomalies were recorded. Radio operators noted interference that fluctuated in rhythm with movement within the caves. Reports state static rises and falls corresponding to motion, observed but unseen. Attempted communication aborted. Operators report subjective sense of being observed. These auditory phenomena were documented across multiple patrols and locations within the cave system, suggesting a consistent pattern rather than isolated hallucinations. The correlation between movement of the winged forms and radio interference adds a layer of empirical observation to otherwise anecdotal and subjective accounts. Temperature and air quality readings, where available, further compound the mystery. Officers noted sudden drops and rises in ambient temperature, sometimes several degrees within seconds, coupled with humidity changes uncorrelated with external conditions. One log states air thickened pressure, altered no draft, no geological explanation. Men report difficulty breathing, sense of presence pressing from above. These physiological responses, consistently recorded, suggest that the phenomena produced measurable effects on the patrol's environment and bodies, even as their origins remained unidentified. Official reports also reference patterns in the movement of these entities. Shadows were observed to follow predictable yet impossible trajectories, appearing in one chamber moments after seemingly traversing multiple junctions simultaneously. This instantaneous relocation, as one officer termed it, created a perception that the cave itself was manipulated, that space and time were being subtly altered by the entity's presence. Notes remark on repeated motifs, wings spanning corridors, talons marking surfaces with no lasting trace, eyes reflecting torchlight, before vanishing, and a persistent sense of being tracked and measured. In correspondence later declassified, Lieutenant Carrington wrote, "We cannot describe them adequately. Each observation defies standard classification. They are present yet not bound by the rules we understand. They move with intelligence. They watch. They test. We are observers of the impossible." These words, stark and unembellished, convey both the horror and fascination the men experienced. The combination of sketches, logbook entries, diary passages, and formal reports forms a composite image, a patrol encountering beings whose reality sits at the threshold of the natural and the impossible, entities that defy rationalization, yet left indelible marks on human memory. Finally, cross-referencing across multiple patrols suggests consistency. The anomalies were not subjective hallucinations or individual error. Independent entries note the same types of phenomena: winged silhouettes, instantaneous movement, physiological effects, shadow interactions with surfaces, auditory interference, temperature fluctuations, establishing a pattern of encounters that remain unexplained. Each fragment of evidence, while partial, collectively paints a portrait of an environment inhabited by entities whose behavior is not accounted for by known wildlife or human interference. Singular disappearances, ephemeral evidence, and repeated sightings converge to form a factual layer of mystery, one grounded in observation, measurement, and documentation. Yet entirely resistant to conventional explanation, establishing a foundation for the folklore and legends that would later envelop these caves in enduring enigma. The mountains of Afghanistan had always carried their share of legend, whispered through generations of villagers and shepherds. But the events of 1943 transformed whispers into enduring tales, stories that would twist around the factual reports left by the Allied patrol and embed themselves into local folklore. The men who entered the caves spoke little once they returned, and their silence became the fertile ground upon which imagination, fear, and superstition would take root. The winged shadows observed by Corporal Jensen and Lieutenant Carrington became more than anomalies recorded in logbooks. They became phantoms in the mind creatures of the dark that blended memory with legend, evidence with imagination. Locals who had long told stories of the flying guardians of the cliffs or winged watchers in the wind-carved hollows found their tales strangely confirmed, though in forms impossible to reconcile with natural creatures. Each patrol report, sketch, and diary entry fed into a tapestry of folklore, layering the mundane with the miraculous, the rationale with the spectral. One such account passed down through oral tradition describes shepherds who decades later would climb near the same cave entrances at dusk and claim to see enormous shapes unfolding in the twilight silhouettes, with wings broader than any known bird eyes, glinting with an intelligence that unsettled the observer. Some swore the wings created no sound, yet displaced air, a faint pressure felt upon the skin, a chilling sensation that suggested presence without visibility. Families spoke of nights when the wind carried low hums, almost like a chorus of wings, a cadence impossible to place yet undeniably rhythmic, punctuated by sharp rustles reminiscent of distant talons scraping stone. These tales mirrored elements in the patrol's journals, forming a bridge between documented events and lived inherited memory. The convergence of fact and folklore suggested a continuity, a resonance across decades, and lent credence to claims that something extraordinary persisted within the cave system's hidden yet persistent, real yet impossible. Villagers' stories included warnings passed to outsiders. "Do not enter the caves at night," they would say, "for the shadows remember, and the wings are restless." Such warnings, initially dismissed by military authorities as superstition, carried motifs reminiscent of what the patrol experienced: unseen observers' movement against reason, physiological reactions such as sudden chills, increased heart rate, and the perception of being followed by a presence beyond comprehension. The interplay of anecdotal evidence and recorded patrol experience created a folkloric layer that could not be entirely discounted, particularly given the consistency in detail: the wings, the silent flight, the glimmering eyes, the sense of measurement and observation. Stories recorded in regional folklore collections recount a similar series of events from decades earlier, long before the 1943 patrol of travelers vanishing near the same highland caves, leaving behind personal items scattered in ways that suggested an unseen force had moved them. Witnesses described hearing winged shapes brushing against the walls, a rhythmic beating echoing through the passages, a movement faster than the eye could follow, yet leaving tangible signs, impressions in dust, slight scuffs on stone, fleeting shadows visible in torchlight. Such accounts reveal a recurrent motif: entities that appear and vanish, impossible in scale and leaving only residual evidence. In some stories, these wings are described as protecting the caves from intrusion, punishing those who wander too deep, and guiding those deemed worthy, an ethereal boundary between the natural and the supernatural. Folklorists who later studied the region noted a pattern in these oral histories: a fusion of environmental hazard with supernatural attribution. The cave's labyrinthine structure, sudden drop-offs, and echoing corridors created conditions ripe for misperception. Yet the repetition of detailed motifs, winged silhouettes, instantaneous appearance and disappearance, a sense of observation, physiological reactions suggests that the phenomena were not merely products of imagination. The stories serve as a lens, a folkloric magnifying glass highlighting elements of the patrol's experience that were most disturbing, most inexplicable, and most persistent in human memory. In essence, folklore codified the elements that shocked, unsettled, and resisted classification, rendering them eternal in communal consciousness. Local legends describe these winged entities as neither fully corporeal nor entirely spectral. They are guardians of forgotten places, observers of human activity, and perhaps the last remnants of something primordial, a presence that cannot be captured by conventional means. Accounts describe forms that fold into shadow, stretching across corridors and fissures, their wings spanning impossible distances, yet leaving no measurable trace. Children recount seeing fleeting glimmers in narrow passageways. Women describe the sensation of unseen wings brushing their hair, and elders speak of eyes glinting with intelligence that is both alien and knowing. These motifs echo almost verbatim the anomalies noted in the Allied patrol's fact layer: wings, shadows, eyes, silence, movement against reason. Folklore and documentation converge, reinforcing each other, blurring the line between evidence and legend, making the impossibility feel tangible, immediate, and inevitable. The creation of folklore around the winged secrets served a dual purpose. It both preserved the memory of encounters and conveyed cautionary advice to future generations. Tales emphasized vigilance, respect, and restraint, embedding psychological markers into cultural memory. The stories became ritualized warnings: never approach unprepared, never provoke, and always acknowledge the unknown. These narratives provided structure to chaos, giving shape to events that resisted conventional explanation, translating ephemeral experiences into enduring lessons. The patrol's observations, once translated through oral tradition, gained new resonance, their shock amplified by collective memory imagination, and the necessity of warning others against the hazards, both material and metaphysical. Through folklore, the winged secrets assumed an identity beyond individual encounter. The patrol's shadowy glimpses, the fleeting movements, the physiological reactions, all elements documented with precision, were magnified in narrative form, wings spanning corridors, claws leaving impressions, and disappearing shadows moving contrary to light, eyes gleaming with intelligence. Every recounting, every retelling added nuanced texture and fear to the legend, while remaining tethered to the kernels of factual observation. The folklore did not fabricate entirely. It amplified, extrapolated, and mythologized, embedding the patrol's impossible encounters into the cultural consciousness of the region, ensuring that even decades later, the winged secrets remained alive in the collective imagination, haunting the caves, guarding the shadows, and perpetuating the tension between what is seen, what is believed, and what remains unknowable. The motif of wings, shadows, and impossible movement persisted beyond the patrols and folklore, creating connections that spanned both time and geography, linking disparate events into a pattern that suggested continuity, design, or intent. Reports from neighboring valleys noted similar phenomena decades before and after 1943, where travelers, shepherds, and occasional military units encountered inexplicable presences within cave systems, mountain passes, and windswept ridges. Each report described forms that moved faster than human perception, wings spanning corridors, shadows that detached from solid surfaces, and eyes that reflected torchlight or moonlight with intelligence. The singular thread running through these accounts was the persistence of a motif, the observation of the impossible made tangible, a recurring interaction between humans and entities whose nature resisted classification. One particularly striking instance occurred in 1927, documented by a British survey team mapping remote regions near the same highlands. The team reported sudden gusts within narrow passages, echoes returning in patterns inconsistent with sound physics, and fleeting winged forms glimpsed in torchlight. Their sketches, though rudimentary, matched strikingly with the 1943 patrol's diagrams: elongated wings, talon-like extremities, and the elusive presence that could not be pinned down. These earlier accounts reinforced the notion that the phenomena were not hallucinations nor individual exaggerations, but rather a repeating pattern, a motif threading through human interaction with these caves. The repetition across time suggests a continuity that transcends ordinary explanation, connecting centuries of human observation with something enduring, hidden, and perhaps intentional. The motif itself carried symbolic weight. For soldiers, the encounter was a confrontation with the unknown, a disruption of expectation that demanded heightened awareness, rapid adaptation, and survival instinct. For villagers and shepherds, the winged shadows became guardians or omens, enforcing boundaries and transmitting warnings through stories. Across contexts, the same elements, wings, shadows, eyes, silence, sudden movement, resurfaced, shaping perception and experience. This consistency lends credence to the idea that the winged secrets were not merely isolated anomalies, but active participants in a narrative larger than any one encounter, a persistent echo across generations and professions, military and civilian alike. Patterns extended beyond sightings into environmental and physiological correlations. Sudden air pressure changes, temperature fluctuations, inexplicable echoes, and the sensation of presence accompanied nearly every encounter. Soldiers in 1943, surveyors in 1927, and villagers recounting events decades earlier consistently noted these conditions. The air thickened or shifted, creating a tangible resistance. Shadows moved contrary to light. Unseen wings displaced air with a subtle but perceptible effect on the body. These repeated correlations reinforced the motif as not purely symbolic or psychological, but as a set of observable phenomena manifesting alongside the winged forms. The pattern is not random. It carries structure, a predictable sequence in an otherwise chaotic and uncertain environment. Motif analysis also reveals psychological and cultural resonance. The winged forms represent both threat and awe, fear and fascination. In military contexts, they challenge training and expectation. forcing soldiers to confront the impossible while maintaining operational effectiveness. In folklore, they enforce social and environmental rules. Caves are sacred, shadows are to be respected. The unknown demands caution. The repetition of motifs across context, time, and observers creates a bridge, a narrative spine linking human perception to recurring phenomena. Each encounter becomes not only an individual event, but part of a network of experience demonstrating that the winged secrets exist as a persistent pattern transcending single observations or singular witnesses. The bridge is further reinforced by evidence of interaction between the observed entities and the environment. Marks in dust, displaced rock impressions along cave walls, and fleeting reflections of light suggest intentional movement and possibly observation. Observers report the impression of being measured, watched, and tested. Such environmental interactions, consistent across decades and contexts, create a unifying motif connecting the 1943 patrol to earlier and later encounters. The caves themselves act as a stage, the entities as both actors and directors, manipulating perception, space, and reaction. The pattern repeats, echoing across time, space, and narrative, forming a continuous motif that merges fact, folklore, and lived experience into a coherent, though inexplicable, phenomenon. In this bridge, the narrative shifts from isolated events to a motif that can be traced, studied, and recognized. The wings, shadows, eyes, echoes, and environmental manipulations form a recognizable pattern of engagement between humans and the impossible. Each account, whether factual report, diary entry, or folktale, interlocks with others, forming a network of evidence and narrative resonance. The recurring pattern is at once empirical and mythic grounding. The winged secrets in reality while simultaneously elevating them into legend. Observers knowingly or unknowingly participate in a ritualized encounter, with the motif carrying the experience forward in memory, story, and cautionary tale, preserving the continuity of the phenomenon across generations and terrains. The patrol pressed deeper into the labyrinthine caves, each corridor narrowing, each shadow thickening the air, growing heavier, charged with a presence that pressed against thought, against reason, against the senses themselves. Torchlight flickered across walls that seemed to breathe, surfaces shifting subtly, angles, impossible corridors lengthening and shortening in ways that made the men question their own perception. A sudden movement to the left, a blur of wings spanning the chamber, forced rifles upward, hearts pounding, yet when they aimed, the space was empty, the shadow gone, leaving only the echo of motion reverberating against stone. Whispers of air, faint and rhythmic, brushed past faces, necks, shoulders, as if the very cave itself exhaled in recognition of their intrusion. The patrol's instruments, previously reliable, became erratic compasses spinning without pattern, radios crackling with static that pulsed in resonance with the unseen movement, thermometers fluctuating sharply in seconds. The men whispered, exchanged glances, filled with disbelief and fear, understanding that what they faced was neither fully material nor fully imagined, existing at the boundary between comprehension and impossibility. Lieutenant Carrington's voice cut through tension, calm but strained. Eyes on every shadow, don't look away. Trust your instincts. Move together. Yet instinct faltered here, betrayed by the visual and auditory anomalies, by the weight of presence pressing unseen, by shadows detaching from the walls and moving independently. A soldier paused at a junction. In the flicker of torchlight, a winged silhouette unfolded, the wings spanning wider than the passage. The air shifted, carrying a low hum in synchrony with the flapping motion, though nothing visible remained. The soldier's pulse raced. He recorded in his journal later. Perception failed, senses overwhelmed, presence undeniable. Each encounter intensified the uncertainty, each moment seared into memory as both real and impossible. The patrol reached a cavern with a vertical shaft, the ceiling obscured in darkness, the walls carved with natural fissures that seemed almost deliberate. A sudden movement above a shadow descending rapidly, wings extended, eyes gleaming in the torchlight, forced the men to drop to the floor. The shadow passed over with a gust of air, brushing hair and shoulders, leaving behind a faint metallic scent, a tangible pressure that pressed the chest, accelerated breath, and deepened fear. They scrambled forward, rifles raised, Yet no creature could be found. No evidence remained. Lieutenant Carrington noted they observe. They measure. They vanish before understanding can follow. The cave itself seemed to respond, corridors twisting subtly walls, narrowing passages, lengthening, as if orchestrating the movement of observers against the movement of the winged forms. Each observation reinforced the motif: wings, shadows, eyes, silence, instantaneous movement, environmental manipulation. Sudden shifts in temperature intensified the physiological strain. Men felt chills, faint dizziness, tightness in the chest, sensations of being lifted or pressed by invisible forces. Every sound, footsteps, whined, stone scraping, was amplified, distorted, and echoed in patterns that did not correspond to physical sources. One soldier swore he felt wings brush past his shoulder, while another in the same corridor reported hearing the faint flapping above even as eyes detected nothing. These inconsistencies, recorded meticulously, created a landscape of impossibility, a record of interaction that was both empirical and surreal. The patrol's attempts at measurement sketches, compass readings, notations were continuously confounded, suggesting that the entity's presence was aware of, even responsive to observation. A critical moment occurred when Corporal Jensen advanced into a chamber previously deemed empty. Wings unfolded from shadow, spanning the entire space, talons scraping, stone eyes reflecting torchlight in a manner impossible to describe. The patrol froze. Torchlight wavered, static hummed from radios. Temperature dropped precipitously. Jensen recorded, "All rational explanation fails, presence undeniable. No trace remains." The winged shadow hovered, observed, then vanished, leaving only the impression of movement, a whisper of air, and a profound awareness of being measured. The event crystallized the pattern witnessed throughout the caves. Instantaneous appearance and disappearance, wings spanning impossible distances, shadows acting independently of light, eyes observing with intelligence, and environmental effects tangible to human physiology. As the patrol retreated toward the exit, every soldier carried the impression of impossibility, the echo of wings, the pressure of unseen observers, the sense that the caves themselves had altered in response to intrusion. Notes, sketches, and personal journals documented the experiences, yet failed to capture the full extent, a record fragmented yet compelling, a pattern of encounters that defied rational explanation, yet anchored in repeated observation, environmental effect, and human testimony. These moments of extreme tension, of impossible phenomena, coalesced into the climax of the patrol's expedition encounters that were simultaneously real and impossible, leaving the men haunted, transformed, and acutely aware that the winged secrets would endure beyond their presence, beyond their understanding, and beyond the bounds of conventional knowledge. The patrol emerged from the caves into pale afternoon sunlight, but the relief of open air was tempered by the weight of memory, the lingering sense that what they had witnessed could not be fully articulated, could not be fully understood. Sketches, journals, and reports would attempt to capture the events: wings spanning corridors, shadows moving independent of light, eyes reflecting torchlight with intelligence. But even these records fell short, fragments of truth, amid an overwhelming, impossible reality. The men spoke little of what they had seen, each hesitant to breach the boundary between reason and the inexplicable. Memory retained what logic could not reconcile: the sensation of air displaced by unseen wings, the hum that pulsed with heartbeats, the pressure of presence, pressing from the darkness, vanishing, before comprehension could anchor it. Back at base, sketches and notes were catalogued, filed, and classified. Officers reviewed diagrams and diary passages, noting patterns, recurring motifs, and physiological reactions recorded by the soldiers: chills, rapid heartbeat, vertigo, a sense of being measured. Analysis could establish sequence, correlation, even environmental effect, yet none could fully explain the entity's existence, their behavior, their intelligence. Reports repeatedly emphasize instantaneous appearances, movements defying physics, shadows detaching from solid surfaces, and eyes reflecting cognition beyond known species. Attempts to replicate phenomena failed. Instruments failed. Logic faltered. And yet the impression persisted, indelible, haunting, impossible to erase. Years later, oral accounts of the caves persisted. Shepherds, villagers, and wandering travelers spoke of wings glimpsed at dusk, of shadows moving contrary to torchlight, of sensations of observation and measurement. Some described hearing low, rhythmic hums, like distant wings beating in a cadence that carried meaning beyond understanding. Others reported faint impressions in dust talons scraping surfaces, then disappearing without trace. These narratives, often dismissed as folklore, mirror the patterns documented by the 1943 patrol: recurring winged forms, ephemeral shadows, sudden environmental shifts, inexplicable physiological responses. A bridge between observation and legend. The tales preserved continuity, connecting generations and locations, transforming a factual expedition into an enduring mystery. The winged secrets remain in memory, in story, in sketch, in whisper. No one has conclusively documented a presence yet. The cumulative evidence, a blend of first-hand accounts, formal reports, diaries, sketches, and folklore lore, creates a lattice of credibility. Each encounter reinforces the motif: wings spanning impossible corridors, shadows detaching from surfaces, eyes reflecting awareness, environmental manipulation, and physiological reaction. Singular disappearances, fleeting glimpses, inexplicable phenomena, and repeated motifs converge, leaving the observer with questions that defy answer, with a narrative that challenges the boundaries of reality. The caves themselves stand undisturbed, silent yet alive, a repository of the impossible. To enter is to confront uncertainty, to witness the interplay of shadow and wing, of presence and absence, of what is seen and what remains invisible. The winged secrets persist as both reality and legend, their influence enduring, shaping perception, embedding themselves in memory, and inspiring awe and fear alike. They are unbound by time, immune to rational explanation, yet undeniably present in the evidence left behind, fragmented, fleeting, yet consistent. You have just listened to another file from Echoes of the Unknown. The patrols, the sketches, the shadows, they continue to exist in stories, in whispers, in the spaces between light and dark. If you wish to explore further, to venture deeper into mysteries that challenge reason, subscribe and follow. Leave your thoughts, your experiences, your questions, share where and when you feel the impossible brush against reality. The winged secrets endure, waiting in shadows, watching from caverns, and echoing in every account that dares to remember.